Good morning everyone and welcome to yet another attempt at the App Clinic of video players. So before we get started, we're going to be reviewing these video player apps, and frankly I don't really understand what the big deal is. I mean, I've had a look at the code, and as far as I can see, this is all we need to do, right? We just need to get a video view, put it somewhere on my screen, and then it's just a simple matter of passing in different URLs, right? I mean, if that's all there is to it, what's the challenge? Why are these apps popular? Why can't people just build it themselves?
Sure. Your ignorance astounds me. You might think that, of course, having a video view that's so easy to use would make it very easy to write a video app.
Absolutely.
But the truth is, in software, things that are very easy to use are often not very powerful, and that's exactly the way that Video Player turned out. Now, we started way back in the early days of Android with media playback via the Media Player API. Of course, that's what we just saw with essentially a one-call, fire and forget way of playing back video. Now, Media Player is really easy to use, but it's probably too easy to use, especially if you're looking for professional custom solutions. It's basically a black box. If you have any kind of special needs, you're out of luck. For instance, Media Player is hardware accelerated, but it's hardware accelerated differently on different platforms, on different versions of the OS, and on different OEM devices, and there's no way to find out what type of hardware acceleration you're getting.
Huh.
Now, that's not really a problem if you don't want customization, because you're always guaranteed that an Android device will play back H.264 baseline profile. A lot of people don't like baseline profile, though, especially people who have already encoded for other devices.
Sure.
So, when we launched Honeycomb, we decided to make some improvements, and we supported an API called OpenMaxAL. Now, the truth is, OpenMaxAL was not necessarily our first choice because it's not a Java API, but it is a Khronos standard, much like OpenGL, and allowed us to get some of the professional features that we were looking for. So, if you wanted professional features in Honeycomb and in Ice Cream Sandwich, OpenMaxAL is a great choice. The drawback is you've got to write your code in C. With Ice Cream Sandwich, we also introduced a new way of working with video, and that was the texture view and surface view. So these, the ability to actually work with video textures allowed you to do some more interesting things like real-time video effects.
Nice.
But things didn't really get real until Jelly Bean. Jelly Bean is the apotheosis of video APIs, by which I mean we have a Java API that works.
Nice.
Jelly Bean supports what we call Media Codec. A Media Codec is not an easy-to-use API by any means, but it's a sort of API that if you are a professional that writes video apps for a living and understands media, you're going to love it, or at least hate it considerably less.
Minimizing hate factor. That's what we're all about.
Absolutely. It gives you low-level access to the media acceleration hardware, and it gives you an API to query what formats the hardware supports. So like I said, it's not a simple API by any means, but it is professional in that it supports most of the use cases and corner cases that a really nice video player needs. And we'll see some of those use cases as we look at the apps. For instance, as I mentioned, Media Player will only hardware accelerate certain formats, and you don't necessarily know what formats those are. So it's impossible with Media Player to make an application that claims to support every format, or even a large number of formats. And I think we noticed that one of the selling points for the players that we're looking at today is how many different media formats they support.
Absolutely. That was one of the biggest things which most of them claimed was which media formats they supported, being able to play things back.
And without Media Codec, you're stuck with two unattractive choices. You can either only support the baseline formats that are hardware accelerated across all Android devices, or you do everything with a software decoder and don't support hardware decoding at all.
Right, and that's going to result in worse playback, right?
In general, or at the very least, a lower battery life because the software implementation is going to require a lot more power since it's being done on the CPU and in a less efficient SoC, part of the SoC.
There you go. That was educational.
Indeed. So let's talk about, if you've decided to make a media app,
Indeed.
what should it be?
Absolutely. So let's have a look. So these are the criteria which we're looking for, the prescriptions, if you will, for making a great video player app. And I think we wanted to break this down into two general categories.
Sure. These are the main two pieces of functionality that every video app we looked at has.
Exactly. And you'll note also that the apps that we're looking at here are video player. So this is apps where you're playing back video that you've already downloaded, put onto your device somehow, rather than apps which are designed for discovering content.
Right. So this isn't Hulu or Netflix. This isn't a Google Play or a streaming service. This is all about you've gotten video, from your camcorder, or you downloaded it from one of these sources, and you want to take a look at it.
Exactly. So there's the two categories of browsing and playback. So for browse, it's really about easy organization. It's about being able to discover the information that you've already got on your device. And so if you've got one or two videos, then that should be fairly straightforward. But you've got to think in terms of scale. What if you've got tens or hundreds of videos that you want to be able to browse through? What's that experience like?
We sort of went through a lot of this with audio playback apps when we talked about those about a month ago, and how one thing that can make or break an app is how easy it is to discover the content that you want to play and ignore the content that you don't. And one of the most important things that a video app can do in the browse mode is respect the no media file that a lot of game developers, for instance, will download a bunch of AVIs or MPEG-4s to a media directory so that they can play it later on in the game. Now, because that's not a universally accessible global media directory that's meant to be played by anyone, they'll stick a .no media file inside that directory. And if you don't respect that,
you're going to get a lot of noise.
Oh, absolutely. You're going to get cutscenes from games that you didn't even know existed. And a lot of times they don't have very informative names.
Sure.
It ends up being kind of a spoiler, really.
You don't know what that is until it's the end scene from a game that you're halfway through playing.
Yep.
So,
thanks a lot. Bard's Tale is ruined for me.
In terms of playback, it's kind of what you'd expect. And again, what we've sort of described already in terms of why you're building these apps to begin with. And it's the ability to be able to play back pretty much anything. So I don't want to have to think about what the codecs are, how it's being transcoded. I just want to copy stuff onto the device and have it play back. And I wanted to do it efficiently as well. So hardware decoding where possible.
Absolutely. I also want to have my app support subtitles. This is really important for hearing impaired people. To me, it's important because I like to watch foreign language films. My wife does not speak English as a foreign or as a first language. You have some problems with American, I believe, Ratos.
That's right. It can get confusing.
Absolutely. So you need to have those subtitles just in case.
Absolutely. And the last thing we wanted to talk about was the notification bar or status bar being the real one. And we saw a lot of apps trying to sort of half take our advice here and say, oh, well, people say that they want to have their status bar visible because they want to see what the time is, they want to see, that sort of information, battery life, Wi-Fi connectivity.
Well, and of course, they weren't taking our advice. I mean, these are features that these apps have had for a long time. It's obvious that people want to be able to see the sorts of things that they see in a notification bar, battery life and the clock being two very important ones.
Absolutely.
But if you're going to show that already, why not just support all of the use cases? When I have a notification, I want to be able to pull it down. I want to know if I need to stop watching my video because there's an important meeting that I completely forgot about.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at the apps which we're going to check out today. So the poor app developers for these apps have been waiting for I think 2 or 3 weeks now for this feedback, but we're going to be looking at MX Player, CineX Player, and Dice Player. So 3 video playing apps there. So let's get started, I guess. Let's kick off. I think the first app we wanted to look at was CineX Player. And as you can see, we've got they've got a feature graphic, which is really nice.
Yeah, and the feature graphic here is nicely done, but I wouldn't use this one personally.
Yeah, I mean, you can see we're looking at confidence monitors from a fair distance away, and you can't really read the name of the app from here. It fades into the background, the contrast isn't really high enough, and the words are too small.
No, all I see is X with maybe an E and something that's either an R or an X.
Next to it, yeah, who can say? So they've got the table stakes here. They've got the ability to be featured or promoted in Google Play by having a feature graphic, which is really important. But they haven't taken advantage of them. We've seen just recently people blogging and talking about the fact that just having a better feature graphic can have a significant impact on your downloads should you be fortunate enough to be promoted.
Exactly. And I can guarantee that for this one, they wouldn't even run it. This would get kicked back to the developer just because it's illegible at those dimensions.
Absolutely.
So, well, why don't you show me what Cinex Player does?
Absolutely.
Now, we've got our fancy HDMI setup. Does not work today, and the reason is that most video apps do not actually display the UI out of the HDMI port. So instead, what we've got is an even fancier and far more expensive solution of Andy's high-tech home movie camera pointed at the screen here. So we'll go ahead and see how that works today.
Sort of camera you'd expect to see in the movie Super 8, only probably the ones filming the movie Super 8 rather than the featured in the movie Super 8.
Exactly.
So this is Cinex, and so Cinex Player. So you can see straight away as we've opened it up, we've got a really customized display, or at least you can see part of it with the reflection. But that kind of makes the point in that it is a very dark looking display.
Mm-hmm. I'm not going to complain. Actually,
no, that's fine.
One of my complaints about the other apps is that they're too
light.
For it. Yeah. Yes.
And part of, but the big deal here is that it is entirely grey. And we've got these massive areas here for thumbnails which aren't populated, which is a little bit surprising, presuming that these movies can be played back. It's kind of weird that you wouldn't display something.
Yeah, that was
here.
The thing that really confused me. Is it felt like we had a thumbnail area, but there's no thumbnail anywhere. I mean, even on camcorder videos and stuff that I completely expected to have a thumbnail. The things that even had a thumbnail in the gallery are not shown with the thumbnail. So did they just run out of time? Or?
It's hard to say. It's disappointing though, because I mean, this is a video playing app is very visual. That's kind of the point. And so part of creating that immersive experience is to have the thumbnails here, so that you're immediately drawn into watching one of these things. Yeah. Really, about all of these apps, it's about engagement, and I think we're lacking here.
I think we're. We don't want to spend too much more time on this black screen, so why don't we go ahead and play This Week in Android Development? Oh!
It can't be done.
No.
Disappointing. So it's nice that they give you the ability to report it, but disappointing that it's not able to play back what seems to be a reasonably standard encoded MP4.
Being the MP4 that you pirated off of YouTube.
Yes. But, I like to think of it as the MP4 that I uploaded to YouTube rather than the one I pulled down from YouTube.
Right. Now, I just noticed that my microphone here has fallen off, and so we'll probably need a lot of dialogue help in post, but I'm going to just clip that right back on here.
Which is a nice change.
Yes, indeed. Everybody Rachel's too loud today.
So let's close this then. So it does give you the ability to report, which presumably will give them the ability to get feedback on what encoding types they don't support. But we can go back here and click on this other video and have that play back.
Right.
And so right away we can see, as we disappear here, we've kind of got partially immersive, but not really. I mean, it's thumbnailed, but that's fine because it is a very small, very low resolution image.
Yeah. Well, is this duck and cover?
It is duck and cover.
Can we get it to, there we go.
There you go. So we can blow it up, so you can have it the native resolution or blow it up to full, which is nice. And we go full screen, but we don't really go full screen. Now, you can see on the display that the navigation along the bottom is still visible.
Okay.
It could be. As is the standard notification. So it kind of feels like my status bar should have gone away. And if this was running on a phone, I can tell you that your status bar would have disappeared. But because this isn't targeting tablet devices or isn't targeting Android 11, we have the menu button. It's kind of shameful in what it's doing here, but it's not a standard menu button of shame.
Well, and I can tell you that not targeting Android 11 is actually the main problem with this app. That Android technology, as we just learned, has moved on considerably from the old Gingerbread Froyo days, where we didn't have a particularly good system-wide story for video, and now we've got so much better APIs. The hardware has come along considerably. The framework now supports a not only much better video playback, but also a much more interesting UI organization. It's a shame that Cinex Player isn't up with the times in that way.
Absolutely. So the big thing here, which would be nice to see, so they've actually implemented this pseudo notification bar along the top here, which does have, let's see if I pause if that'll stop it. So it does have the time, and it has the battery life as well. So it's trying to give us the sort of information which would normally be in my notification bar. But frankly, I just want my notification bar back. And in this instance, it's not even getting rid of it. So it's sort of redundant. A few other things which I wanted to mention while we're looking at Cinex Player. The menu button, which I already mentioned, this should be bringing up a menu, ideally as part of an action bar overflow menu. And what you're looking at here is really settings, which should live behind a settings dialog. What you can see at the bottom here, which is really nice, is that they have used the audio effects APIs in Android, which is allowing you to modify things like treble, bass, 3D effect, and bass boost, which is all part of the Android media effects framework, which is a really nice feature for them to build in.
That is cool. All right. Well, I think that that gives us a good idea of what Cinex Player is about. Let's go ahead and go on to our next victim.
Absolutely. So I think the next. Before we do move on, there is one thing I wanted to mention, which is if you look at the market listing or the Google Play listing for this app, they mentioned that they require the phone state permission to be able to listen for when you've got incoming calls, presumably to pause playback and do sensible things. Now, as it happens, that's probably overthinking it. So Android does already give you a way to be able to know when things like that happen. Most basic of which is it'll pause your activity, right? So when that happens, it's probably a good time to just pause and put everything
on sort of a meta note here, I've noticed that this is, in my opinion, what separates the more professional developers from the less professional developers. I don't know. I think you and I have discussed before, we're both readers. Every now and then we take a look at the website called the Daily WTF.
Absolutely.
And it seems like 90% of the WTF moments on that site come from a developer finding some convoluted way to get the result they want and not asking, gee, is there a better way to do this? Like, instead of writing 200 lines of date and time parsing code in Java, wouldn't you want to use the datetime class? And wouldn't a wise developer think to themselves, I wonder if such a thing as a datetime class exists?
It reminds me of my graphics class, one of my first graphics class at college, where we were given a task to draw a circle on a canvas. And so we all disappeared into the lab, and after a few moments, most of us had the aha moment, went, canvas.drawCircle. That was not enough to dissuade some of our more intrepid folks who had all the arc sines and cosines and were building the whole thing through a series of loops, and it's like, that's very impressive and entirely a waste of time.
Admirable, but yes, unless you're doing this from the ground up on 1980s era hardware, there is probably an accelerated routine in there that you would never be able to write on your own because you don't have access to those particular parts of the framework, or those particular parts of the hardware.
Yeah.
And this is a good example of that. If you find yourself in a place where you need to make the Android device do something, or you need to do something in response to what the Android device is doing, and you find yourself writing convoluted code that asks, what is the user doing, or am I on a tablet so I know whether to rotate into portrait or landscape, or you're just doing a lot of queries, chances are, and this is not always true, but there's a really high likelihood that you're going to be able to find some event that you can just catch in the Android framework. And if for some reason that doesn't suffice, if you found a place where, let's say, on pause does not give you the information you need to pause, then that's a bug, and that should be reported.
And we will definitely listen to that with interest. In terms of audio playback, in fact, there is one additional step you can take, which is listen for the loss of audio focus. So you may find that while you're watching a movie that you have some other audio app starts playing, and you want to be able to pause when that happens, you can listen to the listen for loss of audio focus and pause your playback at the same time. And there is, in fact, an Android training class called Managing Audio Playback, which will give you all of the information you need to do exactly that.
Now read that class, because even apps which correctly catch audio focus change messages have done some horrible things.
Yeah.
What was the one we were just looking at? An app which actually, in response to audio focus change, started playing something, a zero volume stream that was muted.
Oh, that's helpful.
And for some reason, I don't know the whole story, but after playing that app, nothing else would play on the entire whole system.
Interesting.
Because
Perhaps it never gave back audio focus.
Exactly.
It just decided to play a zero volume file. That's impressive.
Yes.
So the next app which we wanted to look at is MX Player. Now this is an app that I think you looked at in more detail, but I've in fact used this one a little bit myself. So we're both a little bit familiar.
Yeah,
with it.
I think we both ended up really enjoying the playback functionality of this one, although I was a little disappointed in the browsing functionality. Now, you don't have quite as much on your device as I did,
Sure.
but it starts out with this really simple browsing interface. Now, unfortunately, it has something that looks like an action bar, but it doesn't really act like an action bar. There's no navigation, there's no up affordance. So when I move down into this movies folder, for instance, although I get pretty much what
you
you'd
get
expect,
the thumbnails, yeah.
there's no way for me to move up, and there's no real indication that I've moved into a different location in the hierarchy. Now, once I had several different folders and playlists and alternate locations on my device, I found that to be sort of disorienting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't really like not knowing where I was in the general hierarchy of my device. That might just be me.
No, I think it's an interesting point and something consistent between all of these apps, which is that the browsing experience doesn't seem optimized for content discovery. So I can see where these apps have probably come from, is people who have this content and they wanted to view it on their tablets. The native media player didn't do the job, and so they've built apps to do that. So knowing what's on there and having it already in a directory structure in all chances is probably going to be enough for them to understand. But as you're trying to build something for more people to use who didn't build the app, you really need to make things like navigation much more prominent, so people who didn't design the app still understand how it works.
Well, yeah, I feel like in this case, the navigation is workmanlike. It certainly does the job, but it doesn't show the sort of craft that we've come to expect out of the top Android apps. And that's sad because the playback screen
this is where it really
amazing.
shines.
All right, so I'm going to resume watching This Week in Android Development. The playback is great, immediately comes full screen. When I decide to bring up the UI, it gives me not only a nicer UI, it's a little less obtrusive, but it also lets me know, for instance, am I hardware accelerated
hardware decoding?
and
Nice.
lets me choose. It does have, we didn't see this on the tablet, but on the phone, I believe it does actually bring up the real notification bar. And
well, indeed, and you can see that
that.
if we hit play here, it will. Oh no, it doesn't. It does.
Okay, so
you
it
can
goes
see
away
everything's
completely.
disappeared, and in fact, even the navigation here. So it's using the Android 4.0, low profile stuff, and on a phone it will do exactly that. So it gives you this completely immersive experience. No notifications, no clocks, nothing. As soon as you hit the screen, boom, you get it all back. You get the status bar, you get the action bar, you get the status and navigation, the whole thing.
And I like that it keeps the UI up when I'm paused, right?
Absolutely.
It has a very nice scrubbing functionality here.
Very nice.
It also has some gestures which I think are really interesting. The moving left to right in the middle of the screen will scrub with a little bit more sensitivity. And then on one side of the screen you get brightness.
Nice.
And then on the other side you get volume.
Very nice.
So that's a cool innovation.
No, definitely. I like that.
But what I found most valuable of all,
Yeah.
because I have an 18-month at home, 18-month-year-old girl, she absolutely loves to watch videos of her mommy and of herself, and not of me, but
Oh, who can blame her?
but it drives her nuts. It drives me nuts when the video goes away because she pressed the wrong area of the screen. And she
Sure.
doesn't know anything about soft buttons or the back button or the home key or the app switcher.
It's all just
she just
screen.
knows that mommy went away and she doesn't know why. So one innovation that I thought was really, really interesting here is this child mode, where
okay.
you press. I'm going to go ahead and bring it out again. While you're playing back, you can press this little lock button, and that puts you into lockout mode. So anything you do on the screen will have no effect except for pressing
happen
this
to press
tiny
the
little
right
lock
little
button. Right.
target.
So
Interesting.
It doesn't completely solve the 18-month-old problem, but it does mean that she's much less likely to hit that tiny little button correctly than she is
Even with the little
to-
fingers.
Exactly. Yeah. Well,
That's
and
interesting.
it requires a bit of a long press too, which is also a
that
little
is
bit
nice.
difficult for her.
So do you know how they went about implementing that?
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea how they did it or whether the way they did it is considered kosher in any way.
Doesn't seem
So
entirely legit,
I'm
even if it
really-
is very useful.
Really looking forward to having a conversation with the framework team and with the developers and see how they went about it.
Absolutely.
Because although I think it breaks a lot of Android rules, on the other hand, it's
It's
awesome.
kind of useful.
So-
That's always an interesting challenge.
So in general, this app scores big on two counts. First is that it's got a really nice UI, and second, it doesn't remove you from the normal Android experience. So as you go out of the full screen mode, you still have the normal Android action bar and the notification bar, everything that you want. The
Absolutely.
only thing, I said action bar, but I meant notification bar. But speaking of action bar, in the browser, that really should be a real action bar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, why isn't it a real action bar?
Well, probably because we haven't released a compatible action bar.
Exactly. and they
That
wanna
seems like
support-
a
Although
reasonable alternative.
Many
but
of the
still.
things that they're doing can't be supported in anything below Jelly Bean. So it would be nice, I think.
Yeah. Well, they don't have a particularly complex browser, which is one of the the comments that we had, and so it would seem like the work involved to get a real action bar and give that native feel for the more advanced devices would be worthwhile an investment at this point.
So just one last note on this browser, and I think we could make this comment about a lot of apps, is that this sort of little thumbnail on the left side of a list view with gigantic amounts of white space around it is really getting old. And some of the newer apps that we've been very impressed by lately and that are doing well in the Google Play Store have gone to a completely different tiled view with large thumbnails, the titles overlaid on an alpha blended background, so you don't get any white space at all.
Absolutely.
And I think that ends up being a much more pleasant browsing experience.
Oh, absolutely. And again, you've got this wonderfully immersive video playback experience. It would be wonderful to have that as part of the browsing experience as well, and really make this much more like a gallery. Frankly, a lot more like the way that the YouTube app works, in that you open it up and you kind of get this wall of video. Now, that's obviously very specific to YouTube, but it's that sort of feel of trying to immerse you in content, which makes you feel all the more willing and desirous of being able to just start playing stuff back, see what's behind each of those windows.
At the same time, let's face it, we're going to spend 2% of our time browsing and 98% of our time watching. And
Absolutely.
this definitely delivers the goods when it comes to watching. Now, nearly as good in that department is our next app, Dice Player. But I think before we talk about that, we wanted to discuss a few more coding questions.
Indeed. So one of the things which I really liked about MX Player was the fact that it handled that immersive experience correctly.
Right.
So it got rid of all of my Chrome, but then brought it all back as soon as I pressed the button. And so if you're wondering, how do I do that? Well, here's the code that tells you. So for Android 4 and above, what you want to do is actually set the system visibility options to system UI flag hide navigation. So what that will do is actually remove all of the Chrome, the status bar, the navigation, the notification bar, everything on Android 4 devices. And you'll note that at the same time as we set that flag, we're also going to set a listener which is going to set the UI flag either visible or full screen. So that's going to remove your notification bar on phone devices as opposed to tablets. So this is the neatest way, and that's what we're seeing on this device. If you go back before that on Android 3, so honeycomb devices, it's a little bit different. We have the ability to hide the status bar, and we also have the ability to go into what's kind of a low profile mode. And so this is going to eliminate your status bar, your notification bar on phone devices, and it's going to make your navigation on Honeycomb devices be those 3 little dots. So it hides as much as it can, but doesn't actually give you any extra screen real estate.
Right. This is what we used to call lights out mode.
Exactly, lights out mode. So that's kind of your next best for your Honeycomb era devices. If you go back one step further, before we had tablet devices and the only Chrome that you had on the screen at all was the status bar, the way to do that was to flag full screen, set the window layout parameters to flag full screen, and that will remove your notification bar. And this is something which is only appropriate to do in very specific circumstances, and playing back video is one of those circumstances. And the important thing to note here for pre-Honeycomb devices is that you have to manually add it and remove it. And so one of the temptations that I've seen a lot of apps do is they simply remove it and you never get it back. So even while you're browsing, whenever you're not even doing video playback, you still don't have your notifications. It's infuriating. So what you actually want to do here is tie this code into play and pause of your media. So whenever you're playing, you can hide the notifications, and as soon as you pause, you bring it back again.
Excellent.
So, shall we move on? Dice Player, I think, was the next app that we wanted to take a look at.
Mm-hmm.
So this doesn't have a feature graphic, so it doesn't have the table stakes to be featured, even if we wanted to, which is disappointing. So that should be the first action item for those guys.
Indeed, yeah, we're very disappointed to see that. But Dice Player, in its implementation, is actually quite nice. Actually, I think that they've got the best browser of the ones that I've looked at.
Certainly looks from here very similar to MX Player, but with a real action bar, which gives it the edge.
You know, the very similar to the MX Player meme will sort of resurface as we go through this. But yeah, it's your typical browser. As we said, could be better. But the really nice thing is that as I go through the browsing experience, I have a very predictable and familiar action bar layout, an action bar UI pattern to deal with. So I can navigate through the action bar navigation pattern, and I've got also my actions over here. Now, there is one thing that confuses me a little bit. There's a screen for well, you know what? I'm going to let you guess. This is this little thing that looks to me like a Monopoly house. What would you say that button will do?
Well, see, I would have assumed that was a misplaced home button. Effectively,
like it would navigate you to the home.
Well, what you would expect when you're hitting this button here, sort of taking you to the root navigation.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. But
let's see what happens when
instead, a complete surprise.
Media folder. So this is how you manage which local folders and it even looks like remote sources are being indexed for your video content.
Right. So I kind of felt like I did when I bought my first box of Wonka mix-ups. You know, the candy where all the colors are wrong, and the strawberry one is orange colored, and the grape one is purple. No, green.
Grape would be purple. Yeah.
Grape would be purple. Anyway, the point is, I felt mixed up.
Absolutely.
What this actually took us to is a settings page for getting other types of media. Now, in its defense, this is an awesome piece of functionality. I can choose a Samba server, I can choose an FTP server, I can take an HTTP stream.
Very nice.
And add them all into this. So if you're like me and you've got like a lot of videos on a share on your Windows machine or Linux machine at home, then being able to connect to Samba or FTP is a really nice piece of functionality.
Absolutely.
And I did test this with my Windows machine at home, and it streamed a large video directly off that machine, and that made me super happy.
Absolutely.
But the functionality, I don't think I ever would have found if I hadn't been thinking, well, gee, how do I get to the home screen of this app?
Yeah, well, indeed. And we're kind of a special case because, we are reviewing these apps. We're going to hit pretty much every button to see what it does. A lot of users are going to even be looking for that particular functionality, take one look at the app, go, well, no, can't see it anywhere here. I guess it doesn't do that. All right, and then move on to the next app. So you want to make sure that any particularly useful functionality like this, differentiating functionality, is really easy to discover.
And while we're talking about discovery too, this is something I noticed a lot with settings. A lot of times I've found apps that have really, really intriguing functionality, and it's hidden in a piece of the settings sometimes that I wouldn't have even thought to look for.
Sure.
And in some cases, it's functionality that I really, really wanted that I sort of wish was either turned on by default or perhaps just more discoverability. Because there's some really cool stuff in here that I wouldn't have thought to look for. Now, when it comes to playback, there's a couple of things that I really, really like about this application.
Sure.
Now, I've been using MX Player more, and I think you have too.
Yeah.
And there's really only one reason for that, and that's because MX Player doesn't hide my notification bar. I mean, in every single other way,
Yeah.
Dice Player is superior in its playback UI. It supports essentially the same scrubbing motions as we saw before, including the fine-tuned scrub here.
Right, but it's not doing a real-time frame preview when we're doing
You're right.
the
I need to
fine-grained
take back
scrubbing.
the in every other way. I was exaggerating there. I was overly excited, uncomfortably so.
Uncomfortably
But-
excited. It's a problem.
But in nearly every way. I mean, they do have a lot of the same. And over here we've got brightness. Over here we've got volume.
I see they've switched that around from MX Player.
Well, you got to be different.
Absolutely.
And I think MX Player actually patented the right-hand side.
That could be it.
Uh,
So you can see
No.
actually as well that while we do have the playback, they've again sort of half gotten right the immersive experience. And so you can see, you probably can't see on the video, but when there is playing back, rather than losing the navigation completely, they go into a Honeycomb compatible lights out mode. And so they're sort of up to date up to Honeycomb, but haven't taken it that extra step for Jelly Bean.
Right, and so that makes it useful on tablets because I do get my notification bar back.
That's right.
But on the phone, you don't.
That's exactly
On
right.
the phone, instead, you get a sort of fake notification bar that has the time and it has the battery indicator,
Yeah.
but it doesn't show me any of my notifications, which is something that I generally like. I also don't like the way that the UI just goes away when I'm paused. I would prefer that it remain. Other than that, though, it does have, of course, the child lock mode that we saw before. One thing that I really like is that it automatically selects to be hardware accelerated if
nice.
the hardware supports it, and if the video is encoded in a way that the hardware can decode. So I don't have to do what I did on the other app, which is think,
Click
oh,
through
gee,
on it.
this really should be hardware accelerated.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't play with it enough to see if it fails on any particular videos, or even if MX Player will actually remember defaults. That would be cool too. But on the initial, first blush, I think that this is a little bit better at playing back video. I would like to see scrubbing.
That would
on
be
this.
nice, yeah.
That would be really
Just
cool.
the little visual touches, which I think MX Player have done a good job at.
Absolutely. But this has some really interesting features. For instance, it does have the capability to speed up videos, which is great on your more recent This Week in Android development, since you bowed to all the
public
people
pressure.
who, yes, well, all those non-English speakers who said they couldn't understand you.
Little did they know that when I spoke at a more reasonable pace, they still couldn't understand me.
Not at all. No.
This way I don't have an excuse.
Exactly. So the other thing that I think is just incredibly interesting here, I'm not going to say too much about it. Let's just see what it does. I press this button here. Oh my goodness, look at that.
How interesting.
I'm not sure whether to love it or hate it, but I get the feeling that if I were using my tablet for a lot of, let's say, email or rote tasks, I might really appreciate having a video that I could just play back in the corner. It certainly appeals to me for the couch potato scenario where
Sure.
I'd like to have something playing while I browse for something else.
Yeah. I
Now
don't know what to
again,
make of this. I'm pretty sure I would know what the framework team would make of it.
I'm pretty sure they're doing something sketchy that's going to break somewhere.
Yeah. I wouldn't
And
be
yes.
banking on this one.
There will be sorrow at some point.
But it's an interesting feature. It's certainly taking things in a direction which I don't think anyone else has thought to do. So
That's fascinating.
fair play for that.
It's very interesting, and I think that as I've shown this to my friends, the people that I've shown it to who are diehard Android, let's say actual developers on the framework team,
Yeah.
think that it's a little sketchy. Other people, they actually think it's kind of awesome. So,
you go.
yeah, that'll happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, people liked Crystal Pepsi too.
People like New Coke. Go figure. How old
All
are
right.
we? All right, so let's have a look. We don't want to spend too much more time today. This was supposed to be a shorter episode, and we seem to be completely unable to mitigate our own blabbermouths. But let's see if we can have a look at some of the prescriptions for these apps
that's completely
specifically.
unfair, by the way. We're 20 minutes behind time, and that doesn't even count the 5 minutes that we spent jerking off at the beginning of the show.
That's very true. That's very true.
Now, aren't you glad that we're not doing this live and we can cut that out?
Very glad.
All right,
very
let's
glad.
go. Let's talk about our results from this week's App Clinic.
Here indeed. So this is the prescriptions for CineX Player. So the big thing there was to use the audio focus and on pause to control the playback rather than relying on notifications from the system that incoming calls are happening and those sorts of things. We really think that they should revisit their custom UI. Nothing wrong with a custom UI, particularly for an app like this, which is very immersive, but I think they're almost an action bar but isn't an action bar, that includes a search control that isn't a search control, is probably something that they might want to reconsider. And the same with the custom status bar. Really take the advice and handle full screen in the way that tablet and phone users have come to expect, that ability to be able to hide everything and then bring it back as soon as you're playing things. I also wanted to point out that the Google Play listing for CineX Player has a fantastic testimonial saying how wonderful the app is on an iPhone. Now that's not entirely good practice.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it bothers us, but it bothers our merchandising team.
Yeah, go
quite
figure, right?
spectacularly.
So if you're building an app like this and you want to be featured, and frankly, who doesn't? You may want to consider things like that. There is going to be someone on the Google Play merchandising team who's going to look at these apps, and if it doesn't have a feature graphic, they're going to pass it by. If it's calling out competitors, they're probably going to think twice as well.
So prescriptions for MX Player are considerably shorter because we both loved the app.
It was a nice app, yeah.
But we'd really like to see a better action bar.
Yeah, it seems like such an easy win. They're already using all of the native Android 4.0 stuff. They've got an action bar or something very much like it in the view. Put it in the browser as well and give us that experience that we're used to.
Absolutely. But the video playback, I think, in general was really great. And the only thing that was jarring was that I would go from the video playback, which is a dark theme and usually a high contrast experience with the videos that I watch, and then I would be plopped directly into this light-themed browser, and especially at night, if I'm watching videos in bed or whatever, that was a little bit jarring. I feel like maybe a dark theme is a better choice for some of these apps.
Yeah, it seems like it would make sense. I did want to call out as well with MX Player, one of the things that they do really well is this ability to play pretty much anything we threw at it. And we threw some pretty obscure media codecs at it and was able to decode everything. If not always at full speed, at least it was able to figure it out, which was really impressive.
That's absolutely true. I remember we threw a QuickTime animation play video at it.
And it didn't choke, which
No,
surprised me.
It played it very slowly, but then again, so did my Mac. So.
Exactly right. It also passed the test. It was the only app that we looked at which was able to play back media which we plugged into the device in any way. So whether that was native on the device, via an SD card, or even via a USB key fob, which I managed to dig out of a skeleton, well, not skeleton, but cobweb-strewn corner, and was still able to do that. So that was impressive.
Dice Player did a lot of things right. Most importantly, I think it got its defaults right. If the video could be hardware accelerated, it was. I think you were pointing out if the video was very small,
it automatically full screened it,
which none of the other players did. I was surprised.
No. And you can argue either way. You can say that they should be showing it to you in its native resolution first and foremost, but really, if you're looking at these apps, at these videos, I should say, on a tablet or on a phone, chances are you just want it to be full screen. You just want to enjoy it in as immersive experience as possible. So it kind of makes sense to default that way.
So really, we just had some nits. I mean, we really liked the Dice Player playback engine and the way that it handled defaults correctly, but we really hated the way that it hid the notification bar. And this is nitpicky, but we felt like the action bar could use a little bit of work. When you hit the back button, it popped up a confirm to exit dialog,
Yeah.
which I don't even know why you do.
No, exactly. I mean, this confirm to exits is one of my pet peeves, along with exit buttons and exit menu items. There really isn't any need for it. There's no need to confirm to exit. Just make sure that there is no status lost when they exit. You know, you get the on pause, you get the on stop, record a shared preference that says what movie they're watching, what the current playback position is, and then if the app gets killed while you're in the background, well, that's fine. When you load it all up for them.
You know, I've worked with a lot of video games that were really, really concerned about what happens when you exit. But that's because they're building these gigantic OpenGL structures,
Yeah.
and they're loading lots of textures. But with this, really, you're recording where you're at in the video and maybe, you know, a zoom level and volume and brightness
Yeah.
and a few other settings. That's it. Because resurrecting the video playback engine on Android is a very, very quick task.
Absolutely. They're hardly reticulating any splines.
Exactly. So get rid of that. Get rid of the custom status bar during playback. We'd really rather just see the normal notification bar. And
in that instance, it looks like really all these guys need to do is take another look at the Jelly Bean APIs, because they're up to date for Honeycomb, but they haven't quite nailed it. And I think if they have a look at the code samples we've given here and take a look at the new Jelly Bean APIs for this, then they'll be good to go.
exactly. So we've already shown how to handle full screen correctly. If they take that to heart, I think they'll have a much better user experience.
Absolutely. So that's the end of the App Clinic for today. A very special midweek episode of the App Clinic to hopefully make up for our terrible disasters in the last couple of weeks. We are going to tempt fate this week by doing 2 App Clinics. We're going to be back on Friday to do an App Clinic on shopping apps.
Which we thought was going to be about apps like Amazon or Zappos. But then
Absolutely.
we realized Amazon and Zappos are the same company and there are no other shopping apps.
Which is apparently what all of our viewers thought as well. So what we have is shopping assistance apps. So we've learned that people would like us to review shopping assistance apps, and that we need to be a lot more clear when we say what our app themes are each week.
Indeed. But we do have some news in that area. I won't spoil it today, but when you tune in next time, we're going to be talking a little bit more about app themes and what will happen to the apps after we've reviewed them. We're very excited.
Absolutely.
Some
So
announcements there.
yeah, it's been an interesting experience. We've gradually increased things, and so you'll see that, or in fact, you may have already watched Nick, Roman, and Adam doing a UX makeover on a couple of these apps. And so we're going to try and find more interesting ways of being able to take the apps that we look at and give them a more thorough going over.
Exactly. Well, thank you to everyone who nominated apps for our video playback app-a-thon.
Indeed.
We
And
really enjoyed it. I found some apps that I didn't know about before. And thank you again for everyone who nominated shopping apps. Now, what are we going to do after shopping apps?
I think there was some talk of celebrating Halloween.
With Halloween apps.
Halloween apps.
What is a Halloween app, Ray Tomeyer?
Well, I'm new to this country, so I assume that there are a huge amount of apps designed specifically for Halloween. How to carve a jack-o'-lantern. How to keep track of the candy that you receive and give out. Surely there is a huge pile of apps that people will have designed specifically for this most sacred of all holiday seasons.
I can only hope you're right. And if that's not the case, what are we going to do instead?
That's a very good question. We'll probably have a look at whatever the next category we have and see if there are people who have nominated apps for that.
Absolutely. Now, you did put up a set of cards on that one site that you like so much.
Trello, that's right.
Indeed.
Yes. So we will share once again the link to Trello on Android Developers Plus page.
And for those of you who thought, like me, we were mistaken, it is not actually a Russian guy singing in a weird sing-song voice.
Or is it? No way to know until you sign in.
Indeed. All right, well, thank you very much for viewing yet another episode of the App Clinic. We will be back Friday with more, and don't forget to watch on Tuesday when Roman Nurek brings us his version of Android Design in Action.
Thanks for watching. I'm Ray Meyer.
I'm Ian D. Lewis.
See you later.
Cheers.